Good morning, everyone. My name is Merav Cohen, and I am very excited to present this final briefing of the Groundwork USA Trust Act of 2015. I thank my team members for their meaningful contributions in preparing this presentation, as well as our faculty advisor, Dr. Matthew Palmer, for his guidance throughout the semester. Brownfields are properties which are unused or underdeveloped due to their contamination or potential presence of hazardous substances. They are usually an industrial or commercial facility that's gone closed and vary a lot in type and size. And they can pose various kinds of risks, in particular when located within residential areas. Such environmental risks, for example, are reduced land productivity, contamination of water resources, and loss of wildlife. And human health can also be compromised either by physical hazards on site or diseases inflicted as a result of this exposure. Furthermore, presence of brownfields within communities pose social and economic implications, as deserted such infrastructures serve as nesting grounds for illegal activity and can also drive down property values nearby. We extracted data from the Environmental Protection Agency to give you an idea of the scale of this problem. These are over 22,000 brownfield sites throughout the United States, which have already been identified and assessed. However, the EPA evaluates that there are over 500,000 of these. These larger blue marks added here represent the Groundwork USA Trust projects, which are independent nonprofits established by local stakeholders within communities to tackle environmental and social problems. Thus, they target brownfields and promote their remediation. Such a project is this one, the Manchester Street Park in Lawrence, Massachusetts. This site, shown here in its prior state to remediation, was found to be contaminated from its former uses as an industrial site. It was abandoned for about 4 years until Groundwork Lawrence Trust initiated its remediation. And today, it is a 5-acre park, a vital hub of community life. To support more such remediation projects, the Groundwork Trust bill was introduced. It aims to allocate federal funding to support the work of these trusts, and the idea behind it is that brownfield remediation is not merely about tackling the hazard on site, chemically or physically. It is about revitalizing communities as a whole. The bill details its funding sources, the selection criteria for organization to receive this funding, as well as the funding terms and the authorized uses for using these grants. However, its definition of a brownfield is rather vague and broad, and it does not specify exactly, for example, how much hazardous substance would qualify a site as a brownfield. This may cause complications when determining funding eligibility, as brownfields do vary a lot in the type and magnitude of the risk that they pose. And the assessment of this risk is, in fact, the first step to remediation of a site. This is done by first identifying what the hazard is, then assessing its effect on the one hand and the exposure to it on the other. And the resulting characterization of this risk will guide us further to the proper management of it. In Lawrence, the site was identified with arsenic, benzopyrene, and dioxin. The gray bars represent the contamination level found on site and how it exceeds the maximum approved state levels in green. Please note, though, that the information presented here is in the logarithmic scale because of dioxin levels which are measured in much smaller magnitudes. This map shows the position of the Lawrence brownfield within a fairly populated area and also on the banks of a pond which connects to a river. Thus, the possible exposure pathways are ingestion of the soil or contact with the skin, as well as inhalation of soil particles in the air. Also, consumption of fish from the adjacent water resources. In terms of health effects, the contaminants found in the Lawrence brownfield are all either known or probable carcinogens, and they pose a range of other possible health effects, some of them described here in this image. For example, dioxin is a known cause for developmental problems with children and also for damage to the immune system. Another important factor in risk characterization is the intended use of the land. This chart illustrates that clean, in fact, is a relative term. The green and blue bars represent the EPA's suggested safe levels for industrial versus residential use, meaning what is the advised maximum level of contaminant. So we see that what would account as clean for building a factory would not necessarily be clean enough for residential use. And contaminant level found in Lawrence, however, exceed both of them by several orders of magnitude. And so we can see it's quite a long way to go to make this a public park. With this end goal in mind for future land use, remediation can be conducted either by degrading the contaminant so it will no longer pose a chemical hazard, or by stabilizing it in place so it will not spread and not be harmful upon contact, or by extracting it altogether, treating or containing it off-site. This can be achieved by various physical, chemical, and biological processes. And these are the most commonly used ones in the United States. Solidification and stabilization of contaminant can be done both physically by essentially wrapping the contaminated substance in impermeable matter and then separating it basically from its environment, or chemically by mixing the contaminated soil with a binding agent, reaching the same effect. Soil vapor extraction means, to put it simply, vacuuming hazardous gases from the ground and then later either treating them chemically or containing them off-site. And an interesting example of biological remediation is phytoremediation. Some plants have the capacity to draw contaminants from the soil and even degrade some of them. Excavation is physically the extraction of polluted matter, containing it or treating it off-site. And one point to keep in mind here is that these various methods vary a lot in their cost, the time, and the effectiveness, depending on the site's attributes. These are all additional strong consideration when choosing the course of action. In Lawrence, they decided to first excavate the top surface layer of the soil containing it off-site, and then the soil was capped to stabilize the contaminant and prevent human contact. Finally, the site was covered with clean soil to allow growing vegetation and recreational use. And how do we measure if this was successful? Officially, remediation is completed when the relevant authorities confirm that there is no further hazard on site. However, there is more to brownfield remediation programs than the contamination level itself. And the EPA does provide us with a variety of simple metrics to portray the achievements of such brownfield programs, and these are described in the middle column. And although these numbers are fairly accessible, they don't tell us exactly the scope and scale of this effect. So we know how many feet of river were remediated. But did this reduce contamination in the system as a whole? And what impact did it make on vegetation and wildlife? So we know how many tons of debris were removed and the amount of infrastructure installed, but did crime levels go down? Did property values go up? So deeper level of analysis of these brownfields throughout the United States in the broader scale is required in order to fully assess their success, and it is currently quite limited. To summarize, brownfields are a large-scale problem in the United States, and the Groundwork Trust Bill aims to create federal funding stream to incentivize remediation of these sites. Remediation starts with the assessment of the risk by examining both the hazards and the routes of exposure. And when managing the risk, the appropriate use of the land determines exactly how clean is clean. And this goal can be later achieved in a variety of remediation approaches and techniques. Lastly, measures of success, which are more easily available, tell us only a partial story. And more data is required in order to fully evaluate the broader effect of brownfield remediation. Ending on a positive note, this is the before and after shot of the Manchester Street Park in Lawrence. This is precisely what the Groundwork Trust Bill aims to promote, transforming environmental liabilities into community assets. Thank you very much. I will be happy to take any questions. Yeah.
Great presentation. I wanted to know if the bill addresses sort of a priority rating of what brownfields should be remediated or funded for remediation first.
That's a great question. So in terms of prioritizing funding, I think it's important to clarify that the bill doesn't fund particular projects. So it funds those groundwork trusts and their operation. Okay? And the funding is not is not a large-scale one. So you can't really use it to remediate sites. But what it does is that it supports the work of these groundwork trusts, and they really are a driving force in the remediation process. So the funding may not be enough to cover a particular remediation project, but there is somebody that is pushing the work to be done and finding the funding and getting all the wheels rolling.
Thanks, Merav, for your presentation. I was just wondering, what is the advantage of channeling funding into these small private projects versus, letting the EPA do it?
That's an interesting question. I don't think it's an either-or kind of question. All right. There are funds. There is funding, or there was actually in the past. It went to larger scale projects like the Superfund to support the actual remediation of these projects. I think it's a good complementary or additional kind of framework, because these trusts come from within the communities. They know the problems. They know where they are, and they know what is the best way to tackle them. And the connections, from what I've read, the connection through these groundwork trusts is much closer to the community in terms of driving the owner to take action and really serve as an intermediary between the authorities and the local communities, in terms of deciding how to best use the property afterwards as well, like what is needed in the community.
So you've discussed the Groundwork Trust quite a bit. Could you elaborate on what constitutes a Groundwork Trust or how you become one? I understand EPA has a Brownfields program already, so what is the advantage of having a Groundwork Trust, and what is a Groundwork Trust?
Yeah, sure. So a Groundwork Trust is just a nonprofit. It's actually called a trust because it is based on a model from England. And in England, these nonprofit organizations are called trusts. I know it kind of threw me off a bit at the beginning as well. Like, why is it called a trust? So it's just a nonprofit organization that is initiated within communities, from stakeholders within the communities. And if you go on the Groundwork USA website, actually, there's a really nice detailed action plan of, start your own. Just explaining how you go about step by step if you want to start your own groundwork trust, and what are the different steps you need to take. To be honest, I didn't dive very deeply into it, but those trusts are. You mentioned the Brownfield program with the EPA. So yes, the Brownfield program with the EPA exists for over 15 years now. And these groundwork trusts are eligible to apply to receive funding within the Brownfield program, right? And the idea here is to provide additional support through this bill.
Thank you, Merav, for this presentation. As new information comes in about contaminants, either previously unknown or just an update of what is known about certain contaminants, is there a separate process for revisiting sites that were once reviewed, or is that just part of the? Is there like a separate list for sites to be revisited?
Oh, thank you for this question, Kevin. So the whole process of remediation is initiated when somebody either complains or when you want to develop the land, right? So you need to get authorization from the different authorities to use that land for that particular use, and then examination is conducted. However, there is need for ongoing sampling of the land. I am not entirely sure how often that is actually conducted. But yes, definitely, that is something that needs to be addressed. I'm not entirely sure how much it's actually done. Yes, Umar.
You mentioned the nonprofit groundwork trust. You mentioned the nonprofit groundwork trust operating to remediate the sites. And my question is the same governance applied and the same NGO, which is Groundwork Trust, carrying out the remediation across all brownfield sites? And if that is so, I'm not sure if that is, doesn't that create a monopoly of sorts?
Okay, I'm not entirely sure I understood your question, but let me try. The Groundwork Trust is, I mean, there is the Groundwork USA Trust, which is like the overarching organization. However, these individual remediation programs are done locally by different organizations, and that's the beauty of it, because they're local, you know, and that's the important point here.
All right, one last question in the back. Oh, in the front.
Hi, Merav. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. I'd like to just clarify between remediation and revitalization, because it appears that the Groundwork Trust would not only remediate but also revitalize the space. So your measurements of success are all about revitalization. So is this a two-step process that the entire bill would address both remediation and revitalization, or the reuse of the space, or just remediation?
Well, that's a great question. Actually, I really wish that the bill would have addressed it in this kind of detail, but this bill is a fairly short one and very straightforward. It does, however, indicate that an important part of measuring, or it actually doesn't detail measurements of success in the bill, but the notion you get from it is that it's not just about the cleanup, okay? And this is often what is done. And the beauty of this bill is that it kind of gives wind to the or supports these kind of organizations that really put in the front the community as a whole. And yeah, so the short answer is that the bill does not address the measurements of success particularly, but the overall notion is that this is an important part of it.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.